Good evening. I want to appreciate the opportunity given to us to present our work. Actually, it's a work that started some 3 years ago, and we are still pursuing the work because of the scope and the findings we are getting in our analysis. And presently, before we submitted this work for this conference, the extent to which the work had gone was what we submitted. And as at now, we have gone far beyond what we are presenting here. We have a lot of data that we have accumulated because of this work. So I want to, I think this will be guided by this outline. And of course, you agree with me that there's, in developing countries, there's a rising population because of laxity in regulation of birth control policies. And also, there's rapid industrialization because developing countries make attempt to want to provide job for the teeming population and also want to be at par with developed countries in terms of the number of industries. And because of that, there's increase in chemical utilization. And closely associated with that is the increase also, corresponding increase in utilization or a generation of waste. And most of the waste are disposed in public environment without adherence to regulations, because environmental laws are also very poorly implemented in developing countries. In this regard, we should know that there's a relationship between climate change, waste disposal, and human health. As far as e-waste is concerned, Africa has become the destination of uncontrolled quantities of e-waste. And very bothersome is the fact that the e-waste sent to Africa, the management practices are very poor, and they are environmentally unsound. And those involved, they do not observe safety standards. Then they are occupationally exposed. I make attempt to let us know from our literature search, where it's globally understood that e-waste refer to waste electrical and electrical equipment that are discarded, and also they include computers, office electronic equipment, and all that, televisions, refrigerators that are at the end of life stage. Those that be considered to be suboptimal in their performance. So people want to dispose them. And these are all grouped together and termed as e-waste. The figure seen is talking about the known and suspected route of e-waste dumping. In the light green, there you see United States, European Union, Korea, and Japan. These are known sources of e-waste. And the light red talk about the known destinations. And if you look at known destination, China is very prominent. Then in West Africa, Nigeria is prominent. In fact, reports state that China is the largest e-waste dump yard in the world. And in Africa, West Africa, particularly Nigeria, is the largest e-waste dump yard. There are toxic chemicals in e-waste, over 1,000, from toxic metals to PVCs, to bisphenol A and all that. And most of these substances are known to be, some are carcinogenic directly, and some are indirectly carcinogenic. Neurotoxicants are there, nephrotoxicants, immunotoxicants, genotoxicants. Of note and of importance in this presentation is the genotoxicants, materials, the toxic substances that can promote DNA damage to the DNA. And when there is damage to the DNA and it's irreversible, it's not changed, the damage is not repaired, it can progress to a cancer eventually. Now in Nigeria, we see zero in Nigeria. That's particularly we looked at South Nigeria. We discovered the management practices of e-waste entails there is manual dismantling, open burning, open dumping of scraps, repair at times, then reuse, direct reuse when the electronic waste or the, in that regard, it will not be called waste in that geographical region. They will be seen as usable electronic device. But when it was sent to the region, it was termed waste. By the time amongst the waste, for example, I will look at this container of electronic waste, but this container can take up to several electronic waste. And numerous of this container, up to 500, come into Nigeria per month. And you see, among this quantity that come to Nigeria, you come to, some of them will be manually dismantled. When we say manual dismantling, no mechanized process. The e-waste recyclers will open them up with bare hands, with normal clothing, no protective clothing, and they'll be exposed to the toxic chemicals. Then at times, after removal of circuit boards, the leftovers will be burnt openly. And we know the far-reaching effect of that. Some of the materials will be burnt and smokes will go to the atmosphere, affecting ozone layer and causing other public health effect. Then you go further to the remnants will be on the ground. Leaching can send those toxic metals to underground water. Then open dumping of scrap to environment. Then when some of these materials are tested, these e-waste are tested, some of them will be found usable. So a proportion will be usable. You look at the various scheme, at this scheme you look at some of the things that happen under open dumping of scrap. Water bodies get contaminated. The e-waste workers, they have systemic accumulation of these toxic substances in the system of the e-waste worker, on the surface of the ground. Then some of these actions are of public health importance, and at the end of the day, like under the open burning, toxicants are released into the air, water, and some of them may bioaccumulate in plants, and that's have a lot of public health implication. For example, this is a technology-based e-waste recycling method. This is an e-waste strider. An e-waste strider produces pieces of metals from electronic waste that are grouped together, bagged for safe disposal, and maybe also for further recycling or reuse. However, the e-waste strider has some merit and demerit. For example, it reduces the risk. It also is environmentally friendly. It's highly profitable because through the e-waste strider, some of the materials can be isolated, and you can have some precious metals like gold, aluminum, and other, which can be used for other processes. However, it's expensive, and it requires a lot of technical know-how, and it's automated, and therefore needs stable power. And all this, will not be practicable to a large extent in developing country where there's resource poverty. At the end of the day, the manual recycling is still what is being practiced. The e-waste perspective e-waste trade, Hill 2002 opined that e-waste trade was simply an act of poisoning the poor for profit, which is quite true. The developed countries could have used technology-based items technology-based equipment to recycle the e-waste, but they find it cheaper to send them to developing country. So it's quite a pity. It's poisoning the poor for profit indeed. In an undercover study by Greenpeace, there was a broken television that was destined for recycling in the UK. Somehow it escaped the recycling program, and at the end of the day, it made a 4,500 mile journey. And the study group, Greenpeace, decided to place a sensor in in the broken television. As it was moving, it left the UK, it entered West Africa. From West Africa, it entered Nigeria. From Nigeria, it entered Alaba. What I showed you here, this is Alaba market in Lagos. I went there last 2 weeks to collect samples, and I had to give the e-waste workers some PPDs, personal protective devices. And so much of those materials were given to them, and they were begging, appealing that more should be given to them. We should continue the work with them. Now, that television got into this market. The study team went back and used the sensor to locate the container that carried it, and they went back and bought it. And they made a statement that indeed, Nigeria is very significant in terms of e-waste movement in the world. Now, e-waste toxicant transfer chain, we attempt to articulate this, up to teenagers in developing countries. When I say teenagers in developing countries, India, China are inclusive. Nigeria. The teenagers pick up electrical panels for resale, and then they are exposed to toxic metals. The indiscriminate disposal of these cause leaching and chemicals to get to groundwater. And there is the further transfer of toxicant in the e-waste through the workers, to family members, to household environment, and through the food chain, it goes back to man. Associating e-waste with cancer, in the theory of cancer development, the involvement of chemical toxicant, oxidative stress, as well as DNA damage are well reported. There is an emergence of China cancer villages, and the heavy e-waste traffic into China and other chemical utilization is not unassociated with the emergence of China cancer villages. And with the growth of chemical utilization, continued e-waste importation to Nigeria, we are afraid that there could be one day CNN could carry the emergence of Nigeria cancer villages. And therefore, we look at it. If the e-waste toxicant has direct carcinogenic effect, from being a carcinogen, example, a cadmium in e-waste has been reported as a carcinogen. In the earlier literature, it used to be believed that cadmium was a substance, a chemical, an element that had indirect carcinogenic effect. But recent literature says that cadmium has direct carcinogenic effect. So at times, you see a carcinogen being metabolized. If it's not a direct carcinogen, it could be metabolized to become a reactive metabolite, which will be a carcinogenic substance. And when this interacts with DNA, there will be modification in DNA, and modification in DNA, when it is repaired, modified DNA, when it's repaired, it comes back to intact DNA. However, when it's not repaired, there will be a replication, and that replication will be replication of a modified DNA, and that could produce a mutation and subsequently lead to cancer. However, on the left-hand side, if the DNA repair process is faulty, there cannot be a production of intact DNA. Now, you will agree, or you like to know that the repair process grossly depends on zinc. In the body, there's what is called P53 protein. P53 protein is the guardian of the genome. When the gene has faulty or ineffective P53 protein, or a downregulation of P53 protein, the gene loses the police, the guardian that protects it. And therefore, the gene becomes exposed to what mutation and cancer will result. Now, P53 protein depends largely on zinc. Zinc is at the central portion of P53 protein. Without zinc, P53 protein cannot protect the genes. That's settled. However, cadmium, by meta-meta interaction, we antagonize zinc. So when e-waste workers are exposed to cadmium, the zinc activity, concentration in them may be normal, may be optimal. But the cadmium will inactivate zinc, or rather, let me say, antagonize zinc, and zinc will not be available for P53 to function. And because of that, the subject will be at risk of cancer. Our study was aimed at assessing the risk associated with occupational exposure to e-waste and cancer development. And we went ahead to look at participants that are exposed, and we use unexposed people to control the study. And we had inclusion criteria of those that have been exposed to e-waste for 5 years and above. Those are open up electrical circuits in electronic and electrical equipment in an attempt to repair them, or in an attempt to recycle, collect the substances, the precious metals inside. We term them as exposed subjects. And those that do this work continuously for up to 5 years were recruited into the study. And this was as a result of the risk assessment study as reported here. And we also had our exclusion criteria. Our exclusion criteria made us to see apparently healthy individuals were occupationally unexposed to e-waste. And at the end of the day, we obtained ethical approval for this study, and we had to obtain informed consent from the participants according to the NCK provision for inclusion of human subjects in biomedical research. And we use these methodologies to assess. We obtained blood samples, and we use this methodology to assess for the blood, the toxic metals in the blood. We went and looked at oxidative stress biomarkers as indicated here, and we did our statistical analysis, and we obtained the following results. Basic demographic details were obtained using a 20-item structured questionnaire to obtain all this information here. And at the end of the day, we took blood pressures and all that to rule out co-founding factors. And interestingly, we compared the toxic metals in the blood of participants to those that were not exposed, and we observed a very significant increase, elevation in the body burden of toxic metals in the blood of participants. And again, we look at oxidative stress biomarkers. We look at them, and we saw that there were a significant difference between these parameters in the blood of exposed subjects compared to non-exposed subjects. The oxidative stress parameter were important to us because of the antioxidant hypothesis of cancer development. When the antioxidant levels of the body they had reduced, as a result of oxidative stress, the subject is at risk of developing cancer, because oxidative stress will cause oxidative DNA damage, and when DNA damage is set in without corresponding repair, there's a risk of cancer. And these are other oxidative stress biomarkers that we looked at, and we went ahead to look at specific cancer biomarkers. Of course, prostate-specific antigen is used to a large extent as a biomarker of prostate cancer, and we also know that alpha-fetoprotein is also used as a biomarker of liver cancer. And we decided to zero in on prostate and liver because in men, globally, the most common cancer are prostate cancer and liver cancer. And we also look at the prevalence of that PSA in exposed subjects. That is a marker of prostate cancer, and we observed that the PSA in exposed subjects was significantly higher, and the value indicated that with continued exposure, there could be the system could progress towards cancer development. And corresponding relating our findings with other studies, we first and foremost in our work, which we reported in Biochemistry, volume 26, we discovered that we observed that a majority of the e-waste workers in Nigeria, they have an exposure body of greater than 6 hours per day and greater than or equal to 6 days per week. And they work without protective devices such as hand gloves, face masks, and all that. And this will cause exposure to toxic metals through almost all body parts. And we also reported that there seemed to be a systemic buildup of key toxic metals in this exposed population, and this may cause synergistic toxicity, a situation where toxic metals in different forms are found in the body. Lead is toxic, cadmium is toxic, arsenic is toxic, so there will be synergistic toxicity, and the system could be greatly compromised. And other reports have come to support the direct relationship between toxic metals and carcinogenesis and the development of other pathologic states, and we have reported that. The role of oxidative stress and lipid peroxidation in carcinogenesis cannot be overruled and is well documented. And furthermore, at the in vitro level, our study is in vivo. We are using human studies. At in vitro levels, our data seem to agree with findings from in vitro studies, as we have reported. And these are findings from in vitro studies, and our data agree with them. And we summarize that the data presented in our study seem to provide evidence that there's a systemic buildup of toxic metals in exposed population, and this may lead to synergistic toxicity as a predisposing factor to many long-term pathologic states, which include cancer. Oxidative stress arising from increased lipid peroxidation, lower antioxidant defenses in the study population may be associated with the chronic exposure to e-waste chemicals and could be a predictive mechanism for chemical carcinogenesis in Nigerian e-waste workers. We're trying to use this to form a model, a mechanistic explanation for the relationship between resultant oxidative stress and cancer development. And in addition, we also believe that elevated cancer risk biomarkers, alpha-fetoprotein and PSA, observed in the study group may be linked to chronic and persistent occupational exposure to known carcinogens. And this we have also reported in Omics Group Journal of Carcinogenesis and Mutagenesis. Omics Group have that journal. We sent the work to them, and they accepted it has been presented. It's online. That's our references, part of the selected references. I would like to acknowledge our University of Benin and University of Ibadan being an academic base that's supporting this study. We also like to appreciate Professor John Aneto and Professor Olade Osibanjo, who are my mentors in this study. My head of department, Agbedana and Ariola, and other people that are listed. We also want to appreciate TED Fund. TED Fund is Tertiary Education Trust Fund for their support in this study and this conference. I appreciate Lina, Augusta, and Nomase, members of my immediate family. And also I appreciate, acknowledge the presence of Chrome Academy, USA, for their training in forensic toxicology, which also broadening the horizon of this work. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your lecture. Is there any questions?
Very nice study. My question is how the society will benefited by this study results?
Okay, that's translational science, how we translate the findings from this work to the society. First and foremost, I told you before we got their consent to be recruited on this study, we had to give them health talk, health education, occupational health education. We educated them, the risk involved in this work, and the need for them to take caution, and the need for them to go for regular medical tests. And some findings that have been done in China, what the implication of such findings on the present way they are doing their occupation. We give them all the health talk. So that's one benefit. Prior to laboratory analysis. So the thoughts of this research has given us the knowledge to give them such health education. That's benefit number one. Benefit number two, in the course of, after giving their consent, we gave them PPDs, personal protective devices, and we told them how to use these PPDs. Because a study was published in China that, the children and the spouses of the e-waste workers also had a tendency to develop cancer. How? Perhaps The e-waste workers are gone to work, and they come back home with their clothes full of a lot of toxic substances. They drop the clothes in the household environment. Their family members are exposed to it. Or in an attempt to clean up, wash, and all that, they interact with the environment. Their family members are exposed to it. So we told them, use these PPDs. When you are through with the PPD, drop the PPDs at work. Then you go ahead, and when you want to wash the PPD, since there are not too many, just apron and other, wash at the office, at the workshop, and dry at the workshop to reduce the burden transferred to the domestic environment. That's a benefit. Then, as we are publishing, like Homies Group Journal of Carcinogenesis and Mutagenesis, it's an open access journal. So the whole world sees the work. These are data that we will gather together. And we could use this data to make an appeal to government. The government come to our aid. These are the group of, we have a statistic of the number of people involved. The e-waste management it could be a gold mine if well organized. So it could be an avenue for employment. So let's reduce the risk in this promising employment provider. Let's reduce the risk so we can use to help to canvas for policy implementation. There are policies banning indiscriminate importation of e-waste across countries. But the policies are the Bamako Convention, Rotterdam Convention, and other. The policies are not implemented. So the data could be a stimulant to policy implementation as the time goes on.
The government role is more important here. Nigerian government can play the better role to create the awareness among the workers and in the society.
Thank you. Your presentation was very useful but very depressing. Yeah. I mean, it's shocking that this is the negative impact of e-waste. I guess there's a government in Nigeria. What are they doing about it? This stuff is being dumped on their soil, and how does it come in? And why can't the government clamp down on the companies that are trading?
Okay. E-waste issue all over the world is a big issue. In Spain, there are e-waste issues. Because you may be able to control inflow, transboundary inflow. What about the locally generated e-waste? Week to week, e-waste is locally generated. Even if you place a ban, no more importation from any way, and you have a watertight boundary, you will still generate locally. So the way the government in each country look at electronic waste is the way the Nigerian government also look at electronic waste. Most countries don't tend to see the danger inherent in proper recycling of locally generated and proper implementation of transboundary policies against importation. So that's one part of my question. Government, people in government could have the knowledge of science, but they may not have these details as we're having in this kind of conference. They may not have. For example, if this conference gets over now, our talk, everything is loaded and sent to the appropriate government quarters, like minister, commissioner, premier of environment, and other, to read. It will help. Rather than we wait for them to come across the knowledge one day. They may not come across the knowledge as in-depth as we are having it here. And without knowledge, policymakers are what? They are disabled. They won't do the best for us. Now in Nigeria, don't forget it's a developing country. Most times, developing countries are not able to meet basic needs or give proper employment to citizens. Citizens are, to a great extent, allowed to seek for means of livelihood. And one of the e-waste activity, one of the reasons for the e-waste activity, people seek for means of livelihood. Some people go out there to collect this waste electrical and electrical equipment and import to Nigeria. That is their work. They will import it. Now, another set of people goes to buy from the importers and make effort to repair. Another set of people go to buy the discarded, unrepairable ones and they do something else with it. It's a chain of occupation for different set of people. So, but there's laxity in the Nigerian government's part. Not just Nigerian government, there's a laxity all over the world, but for Nigeria, it's very high. There's laxity in implementation of the conventions. When the conventions are implemented, the volume that is coming from developed country will be reduced. Then, implementing the conventions will not stop the e-waste problem. What of the e-waste that are locally generated? There must also be a need to set up centers that will help in the technology-based recycling of locally generated e-waste. These two options, implementation of convention, setting up formal recycling method, they are lacking in all developing countries. I have not read anywhere there is formal e-waste recycling plants, whether in India, China, Nigeria, Ghana. I have not read. If it exists, it may be a new development. So there's no formal e-waste recycling process and plants. And that's a challenge to the government. Thank you.